We got a great guest on this morning for a very topical reason, and a person that you got a chance to meet before, right, Dave?
Yes, right here in New Orleans, too, at CVSA's meeting. I forget how long ago it was. Adrienne Gildea, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me back on.
Oh, well, thanks for coming back on. How long ago was the CVSA conference that we were at?
Almost 2 months ago. It was the
Wow.
last week of April going into the first week of May.
It seems like a couple of weeks. Man, I'll tell you what, time is flying, but it was really great to meet you then. We only had a few minutes to talk, and if you remember at the time, everybody was heading into that big ballroom to get the latest on the English proficiency redo, I guess you might say, in terms of putting it back into the out-of-service thing. I thought we'd touch on that, not dwell, but touch on that here a little bit this morning, Adrienne. But also, you guys are taking a look at personal conveyance, and some of the numbers coming out of that are pretty significant, so I thought we'd talk through that. But as sort of maybe just a touch of an introduction into the English-speaking thing, Ramon Dillon was just on with us. He heads up the North American Punjabi Trucking Association. And I was kidding around with him. I said, I went to look at some of your YouTube videos and podcasts, and I said, they were all in Punjabi. I couldn't understand a word, and we were laughing about that. But I asked him, I said, this may be kind of a prickly question, but how are you guys handling the English thing? And he just flat out said, look, English is the requirement. It makes sense. It's the safest thing. No questions asked. Is that pretty much the consensus from folks that you are talking to who don't have English, say, as a native language? Or is there a lot of pushback?
I wouldn't say pushback. There's been a lot of questions and inquiries about what the standard is going to look like, how are drivers expected to meet it, and, folks trying to prepare themselves to make sure that they are meeting the standard. Most folks believe that their drivers do and are confident that it will be fine, but in the occasions where something a driver does get put out of service or something like that, motor carriers are also very interested in what they need to do to make sure that they can get their driver back into compliance before they send them back out of the road. So I wouldn't say pushback, but there's just been, because the violation will now come with an out-of-service order, there's a lot of interest in making sure everybody's got their, I's dotted and T's crossed before the order goes into effect on the 25th.
Got it. And we've all dwelled on this for a while, but everybody always needs repetition. I sure do. So the rule is not a new rule. It's just a recircling to the original rule in the first place, which says that if you cannot sufficiently converse with the law enforcement or the motoring public in English, if you don't understand road signs, and if you're going to be put out of service. And that was happening. And then CVSA said, you know what? In a sense, I'm going to say this is going to sound silly. Well, if he got that truck in here for the inspection, he can probably drive and he knows when to stop. So what's the problem? And there are a lot of folks, even in some friends who used to be with FMCSA, say, that whole English thing was never really that big of a deal in the first place. I don't want to ask for a personal opinion. That would be unfair, Adrienne, but are we okay on this? Can we move on from this, or is this going to be, it's going to be festering for a while, do you think?
Well, I'm hopeful that it won't fester. As you mentioned, the English language proficiency requirement has been in the out-of-service criteria. It was removed. It is now going back in officially as of the 25th, later this week. Mm-hmm. And, to your point earlier, it's always been a regulation. Drivers are always been expected to comply with the requirements in 391.11b2 that says, they can speak English language, to converse with the public, understand traffic signs, signals, respond to official inquiries. So it's not a new requirement. And at the end of the day, the president issued an executive order directing FMCSA to work with CVSA to get this back in the out-of-service criteria. And so that is what the alliance working with the agency has done. And, hopefully, and again, as I mentioned before, most motor carriers that I've talked to, feel pretty confident that their drivers are going to be in compliance. They just want to make sure that they know exactly what that means and what to do when they do run into an issue. So hopefully drivers, for the most part, have been meeting this requirement already, and it won't be that major of an impact once the out-of-service condition goes into effect.
You know, when this became the talk of the town a couple of months ago, we got a lot of calls from a lot of drivers who have driven in other parts of the world, a lot of it attached to military service and things. And the guys, and Jimmy, you know this, you've talked to several of the guys who got licenses over in Germany, and they said, "Man, getting a license in Germany is like
even as a even to drive in their military capacity.
Yeah.
Even before we get to like them having to be able to have the equivalent of a CDL in Germany, the number of veterans who called and said, "Hey, man, the test we had to pass to simply drive in Germany was extensive." So, I mean, this is not
400 traffic signs.
Yeah,
or something.
this is not anything that is the rest of the world gets this. This is not a situation here that is different from any place else. And it's and them's the rules. And the president, by the way, I'm not always in agreement with executive orders, but this is a place where FMCSA falls under the executive branch, and he can give that order, can he not? Correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, he directed the agency to rescind their previous guidance on this topic and issue new guidance, which they have done, and they directed the agency to work with the organization that handles the out-of-service criteria. That's us. And so, absolutely, they're part of the administration, and they work for the president, and they've, I think, done a great job of responding really quickly to the executive order, which, by the way, had a 60-day turnaround time, which is pretty fast when you're talking federal government time.
It's kind of amazing. It's up there with the I don't know if you guys know about the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s. This has been one of the fastest things I've ever seen the federal government do in my life, and I've been around a little bit, by the way. But Dave, you want to pivot, don't you? You want to pivot to the...
I do, and we're going to pivot into something else, which is going to be the thrust of our conversation here, Adrienne. But one thing I do want to just kind of lay out there is the nuts and bolts of it. It's my understanding that there is a two-part test. The first part is a conversational test, if you will. If you pass that, then you move on to the road sign portion. If you don't pass the conversational step one, then you're put out of service there. And if you don't pass the signs, then you're put out of service. Is that pretty much the nuts and bolts of it? Adrienne?
Yes, sir, that is exactly right. You laid it out exactly right.
Okay, fantastic. So we'll leave that to rest for a while. Let us move on to now. We had Jamie Jones on from Landline OOID a little bit earlier, and I pointed out one of the points of the CVSA's petition to FMCSA about personal conveyance. And I'm just going to read this. Owner-operators cannot use personal conveyance to return home or leave home. As you can well imagine, that is not going over well with a lot of folks. So I guess the what's up with that question is going to ensue there. But one of the things that would basically gave you guys the impetus to do this, and I'm reading some numbers here. It all boils down to numbers, does it not, all the time. Over 41,000 roadside inspections. CVSA figures that about 38% of drivers use conveyance time, personal conveyance, improperly. Those numbers are big enough to kind of do something about it. So you guys are putting the spotlight back on that rotating spotlight like a lighthouse. It's back on personal conveyance now, which has always been so nebulous because it's never been a rule or a regulation or a law. It's always been guidance. And guidance, whoo, that is a hornet's nest, isn't it?
Yeah, so you two things I want to respond to there. First, the owner-operator piece. I want to just clarify, because I can understand why that would not sit well with that driving population, and I totally get it. Our petition asks for specific written guidance from FMCSA on owner-operators not being able to use PC to return home or leave work. That is because informally, we have received that guidance from FMCSA, and the inspector community has emails and things like that that tells us, because we've asked, hey, how do we treat this for an owner operator versus a driver who's working for a motor carrier? And the response we got, like, informally, is no, the owner operator's home is their principal place of business, so they can't use PC that way. And we're simply asking for FMCSA to then make that informal guidance that we have received official. We don't necessarily saying we agree or disagree with it. It's what we've been told. And so we need the agency to provide that guidance to us officially so that folks know that that is the official guidance on the topic, and then perhaps can respond and provide their input on what they think about that. On the data side, yeah, absolutely. You captured it all perfectly there. The only thing I'd add is that those 39% of the drivers that are using personal conveyance improperly, we sent our data out for data analysis, and what we learned from that data analysis is that 39% of drivers using it improperly, the motor carriers who they drive for are 4 times more likely to be involved in a crash. So obviously we're not able, as a private organization, we don't have access to the driver data, so we can't drill down that far into the information. But what we can determine is that motor carriers whose drivers use PC incorrectly are 4 times more likely to be involved in a crash, and we think there's an obvious safety connection there that needs to be addressed.
And Jimmy Mack is here, and he does have a question for you, Adrienne, but I kind of want to pull something out in terms of what you just said. Driver information, driver records. Are you going to get some of that stuff, or is that verboten?
No, we don't have access to driver data,
Okay.
And obviously shouldn't. It's personal.
Yeah, right. I just wanted to get that out there. Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, for sure.
What I wanted to ask you about is more of a kind of a clarification. So if I'm hearing you correctly, this is as much about the companies that are employing these owner-operators and these independent drivers and less about the independent drivers abusing it and trying to figure out, and like I said, I don't know the answer. I'm not asking a question that I think I know the answer to. Is this about figuring out which companies that are bringing on owner-operators and independent drivers and figuring out if they're abusing these drivers by asking for personal conveyance? Is there something going on beyond just the men and women who are driving that you're looking at here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty widespread problem, and I don't want to give the impression that it is restricted just to owner-operators and independent drivers either. This is across the board, all drivers, not just those working as owner-operators. We didn't drill down and kind of separate them out. And we have heard anecdotally instances where drivers are being told by, whomever they're working with on their load, oh, hey, I'm running out of hours. That's fine. Switch into PC and go the next hour and a half, 2 hours, 150 miles, whatever it is you need to do. So we do know that there are instances where drivers are being instructed to use personal conveyance improperly to finish a load. And that's obviously a burden on drivers that is not appropriate. And then we know other drivers are using it inappropriately of their own volition on their own time. And sometimes people are just getting it wrong. And so, in addition to the caps, our petition has a number of clarifications we're asking for to help drivers and motor carriers and enforcement better understand what qualifies as personal conveyance under what scenarios, that we can all understand the regulation better and apply it more appropriately.
We have rules and regulations on everything but personal conveyance. It's guidance, and it's very confusing. And there's enough people doing it wrong to where it's become an issue, a real issue now. Is personal conveyance something that is just impossible to nail down into a rule because everybody is different? And do you just go so far in the weeds if you try to codify it to that degree? I don't even know how to ask that question. You can tell that
You just asked it.
Yeah,
You just asked
okay.
it. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I don't think so at all. I think that we can do, we don't need to let the perfect get in the way of the good. I think that there's a lot of clarification that can be done on the term personal conveyance and what it means to get us maybe not 100% of the way there, but maybe 95% of the way there. Define yard move, for example. What does enhancing operational readiness mean? Clarify the thing about owner-operators. A lot of people confuse personal conveyance, and let's call that personal conveyance with capital letters, with personal use of a CMV. A lot of times we talk to folks, hey, if you cap personal conveyance, I can't use my truck on the weekend to drive to see my relatives or to go to this event or anything like that. And, but there's additional clarification needed there too, because if you're not in commerce, right? If you're not headed to pick up a load, coming back from a load, or, dropping off, like if you're not in commerce and you're using your truck just for personal reasons, the same way I use my Mazda, then you're not actually in personal conveyance either. You're in personal use. And that's different. And so there's a lot of clarification that needs to be done, in addition to our request that it be capped. We are absolutely asking for that because we believe it's appropriate. But there's a lot of clarification needed regardless of how you feel about capping it, so that folks better understand. Like you mentioned, in our data shows, almost 40% of the time the drivers are using it improperly. There's something wrong there when a regulation is gotten wrong 40% of the time.
Go ahead, Kim.
I'm going to ask you an absolutely unfair question, so buckle up. I mean, you are the Deputy Executive Director of the CVSA, but this might not be fair. What does that education process look like? What does that public service announcement look like? How do we get people better educated on this? What can CVSA do to make sure that the industry understands in a more clear fashion what personal conveyance actually means?
That is absolutely a fair question. I don't mind it at all. I think step one, we need more clarity from the regulators so that we, as the enforcement community and our colleagues in the motor carrier industry, like folks at American Trucking Associations, OOIDA, Tank Truck Carriers, all of those other associations, once we all understand what it means and can effectively define it, then we can do that education. Again, it's everything from webinars to coming on shows like this and talking about it, making folks out there aware of it, APA reaching out to their members, OOIDA reaching out to theirs. And then on the roadside, inspectors often view an inspection as an opportunity to kind of take a moment and explain to the driver, hey, this is why this is wrong. If you're interested, I can explain it to you. And if the inspectors feel confident and that they understand what is and what is not personal conveyance, then, on a very granular level down there on the roadside, when they're talking to a driver and they're explaining, hey, here's why I'm writing this violation, they can do that education there too. So there's a lot of different ways to push out the information once we all have it and understand it. And so, again, going back to the petition, that's step one. We want to ask the agency to provide this clarity so that we can then apply it and inform the folks out there on the roads of what we've learned from the agency.
I'm going to ask, once again, another question that really kind of gets down to basic simplicity. And Adrienne Gildea joins us this morning, CVSA's Deputy Executive Director. Just for the sake of clarity, there's so much alphabet soup out there, and lots of people know who you are. But can you kind of explain at its basic core? I always ask this question. If somebody asked you at a party, what is it you do? How do you respond to that question?
Yeah, great. I appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so CVSA, we're a nonprofit organization. We represent the truck and bus inspectors in the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, and our industry partners who are interested in truck and bus safety. We view ourselves as a forum to bring together the enforcement community, the regulators, and the regulated community, the motor carriers, and everybody else in that space, to discuss commercial motor vehicle safety issues and trends and concerns, and hopefully work together effectively to come up with recommended solutions, whether it's changes to the out-of-service criteria, changes to the inspection procedure, petitions to the agency, letters to Congress, whatever it is. We very much view ourselves as a forum bringing together all of these portions of the industry that are interested in advancing commercial motor vehicle safety and reducing crashes, and then we provide that forum for the discussion.
Having worked in law enforcement myself, I will tell you that one of the great benefits of an organization like yours is I can't tell you the number of times somebody said, what are we doing here? The number of times that there's always been something kind of hazy or fuzzy about a particular piece of enforcement. And so what you guys really are trying to do is not come up with new rules and new laws and all that kind of stuff. It seems like the core of what CVSA is always looking for is give us clarity so we can make sure that when people cross state lines, they get the same fair shake in one place as they do in another. Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly right. I mean, we were formed back in the 80s by a coalition of industry and jurisdictions who are like, hey, we've all got to get on the same page. Commerce is international. It crosses state lines. It crosses international lines. And the motor carrier community has has a right to expect consistent, uniform enforcement of the regulations. So somebody needs to kind of step up and coordinate that, and that's what we do. And it's not about always making new regulations or more rules. Like every rule that a motor carrier or driver has to comply with, an enforcement officer has to understand in order to apply it. So we would like the book to be, as simple and as straightforward as possible as well, because we have to apply the regulations. So sometimes it's not about new regulations. Sometimes, like you said, it's about clarifying the regulations, getting rid of outdated regulations, getting rid of regulations that don't make sense. I think CVSA recently published a full slew of deregulatory actions, and 3 of them are in response to petitions from CVSA asking the agency to do things like remove the rear impact guard labeling requirement that is virtually impossible for industry to comply with. Once the label's gone, it's gone, and you can't get a new one, so let's adjust that regulation. So it very much is about troubleshooting the industry, finding issues that we can address together, and making improvements to the regulations so that those who have to comply with them can understand them, and those who have to enforce them can do so consistently.
Adrienne Gildea is with us. She is the
Executive Director.
the number 2 person.
Deputy Executive Director.
Deputy Executive Director at CVSA. Had a chance to meet Adrienne and some other wonderful people for a whirlwind 2 days here in New Orleans at the Hilton down on the riverfront at the foot of Canal Street at the entrance to the French Quarter for the annual meeting here a couple of months ago. So, Adrienne, I would imagine that all of the media folks that you're talking to this week are going to point to April 22nd, Tuesday, for Brake Safety Day. The numbers just came out. The headline reads, CVSA places almost 400 vehicles out of service for Brake Safety Day, and that should scare everybody right off the road.
Except that 91% actually passed the test with flying colors, right?
Yeah, exactly. So when you find it out that it's 8.7%, but still 8% of trucks out there on the road with brake safety violations is way too many trucks. We all know that. But the saving grace is the out-of-service rate is down almost 3% from the last 2 years of Brake Safety Day results. So, Adrienne, that's good. This is that one day of the year with the CVSA announces everything well in advance so people can pass. It's like giving out the questions to the test before the test. We talked about that a couple of months ago here in town. But this is the surprise inspection, the one-day thing. What is the general consensus among you guys at CVSA on this year's results?
Well, we're really encouraged by the results. These are, like you said, we announce most of them. We do this unannounced ones to kind of do a temperature check, a spot check on how things are looking. And to your point, numbers, the number of brake violations, critical brake violations out there, from year to year has dropped, and we are encouraged by that. We hope it means that, drivers and motor carriers are paying closer attention to their brake components and their brake systems and making sure that they are maintaining them. We're really encouraged by it. We hope that trend continues because, obviously, all of the components of our truck are important, and we want to make sure we're maintaining everything the way that we're supposed to be because they all fit together to make the vehicle safe. But brakes are particularly important, which is why we have a brake safety week and a brake safety day, is because we all recognize the absolutely critical role that well-maintained brakes play in safety. And so, like I said, overall, very encouraged with the reducing numbers, but obviously 8.7% is still a lot, and we want to continue to see that number drive down.
I want to circle back just very briefly here because we only have a brief amount of time left, Adrienne. But okay, so you've sent the actual petition. The news came out about the fact that you were going to do the petition well in advance of the actual petition being made, which was pretty cool. So we all got a lot of a pre-warning, if you want to call it a warning, on the out-of-service thing. I'm sorry, on the personal conveyance thing. So what are we going to do now? Go into the 2-3 month thing, and then it's going to be 2 years before this is solved. You know what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I have a confession to make. I haven't actually submitted the petition yet.
Oh, I thought you had done that last week. Okay.
No, it's not quite done. We have been very busy, as I'm sure you can imagine, preparing for the implementation of the out of service condition with English language proficiency.
Yeah.
We've been diligently trying to get all of our ducks in a row for that, and so I have the outline of the petition, and I do hope to submit it by sometime in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll wait for the agencies to respond, and then, as you said, we wait for the federal process to take place. We're hopeful that we've made a strong enough case, or we will be making a strong enough case in this petition to make the safety case that something needs to be done. And like I said, before when we were talking about it, we are asking for a number of things. We are asking for a 2-hour cap to align it with adverse driving limit time and things like that. But regardless of how folks feel about the cap request, and I know there's a lot of different opinions on that, I think that we can all agree that some of the clarifications that are listed, that will be listed in the petition, absolutely need to be addressed, regardless of the cap itself, because again, almost 40% of the time drivers are using it incorrectly, and there's a problem there. And people are confused by what it means and when it is and it's not appropriate to use personal conveyance. And I think we have a responsibility to the motor carrier industry to provide them with clear regulations that are that they're able to comply with.
Indeed. Adrienne, thank you so much. Before we turn it back over to Jimmy Mack, I just want to say a special good morning to someone who I think might be listening, Nicole Leandro. I want to thank Nicole for putting everything together, and it was delightful working with her here in New Orleans at the convention.
Hey, go to CVSA.org. You can find them on the X, formerly known as Twitter, at CVSA, and of course on the Book of Face and the LinkedIn at the Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance. Our fellow lover of New Orleans. There's no other way to describe her, because after all, she spent her time at Tulane. Adrienne Gildea has joined us this morning, CVSA's Deputy Executive Director. Adrienne, thank you, and you're welcome back anytime.
Anytime.
Guys, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it, and I'd be delighted to come back. Just reach out to Nicole, and I'll say hi to Nicole too. Hi, Nicole.
RadioNemo.com.